spotlight is shifting to Tshwane and Ethekwini today, as they're yet to elect their leadership. Yesterday, the Ethekwini council meeting had to be abandoned due to chaotic scenes that played out there. So far, the DA has taken control of two of Gauteng's metros, that's Ekurhuleni and Johannesburg. For more on the story, we're joined now on the line by political analyst Sanusha Naidu. Sanusha, it's great to have you with us, and great to be talking to you on this incredibly interesting story for you as a political analyst. It's new terrain, this sort of shifting of our political landscape in the country.
Good morning, Michelle, and good morning to the viewers. Indeed it is. I think yesterday's unfolding events and developments with regard to the DA. I mean, if you take the DA and you consider what was happening in the run-up to yesterday's council meetings in the city of Johannesburg, Ekurhuleni, you kind of got the sense that the DA was not going into any kind of formalized coalition agreement. You saw the ebb and flow with the EFF. You saw that the DA said they're not going to support Herman Mashaba. And it was quite interesting to watch. You know, we keep, in the run-up to this coalition discussion and coalition politics, it was interesting to see that people were talking about a realignment of the ANC and the DA in order to see how the political spectrum and the landscape can be galvanized or consolidated. What was interesting yesterday was that in those two metros, in Ekurhuleni and the city of Johannesburg, the DA didn't go in with a formal kind of arrangement, but the EFF kind of came and supported them. Now the challenge is what does this mean going forward for the DA? How do they deal with a more stable coalition in the city of Johannesburg, in Ekurhuleni? Also because, you know, governance is not just about whether you get the support and the votes. It's also about the budget. It's about what policies you want to roll out, what kind of implementation you want to go through. And these are some of the nuances that could become interesting dynamics in terms of the support that the EFF and the Action SA had given the DA, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that it's going to be smooth sailing for the DA in this process. I think in Tshwane today, we have to look out for those dynamics again, where the EFF, surprisingly for me, you know, given the way in which the EFF has always positioned itself as the champion of the poor, the indignant, and the vulnerable, and had a very interesting, if not aggressive, approach to how it interpreted race and parties that are based on race in South Africa, that they lent their support to the DA in the two metros that I mentioned. So in Tshwane today, we'll have to watch and see whether that's a similar trend. And if it does happen, it means that the DA scoops all three big metros in Gauteng.
I mean, Sanusha, some of the fear-mongering that we saw from a number of parties, but, you know, perhaps particularly the DA insofar as voting for smaller parties is concerned. I'm talking about the campaigning in the run-up to the election. There was a lot of discussion that a vote for a smaller party is actually a wasted vote. Now we're seeing, a couple of weeks since the election results were declared, we're now into the election and nomination and election of speakers and mayors and all-important council decision being made. Now we see the importance of voting for smaller parties in a multi-party democracy, which Action SA's Herman Mashaba says was the primary aim in his voting alongside the DA. Not necessarily a support for the DA, but rather a support for multi-party democracy.
Indeed, Michelle, and I think, you know, in the run-up to the election, the DA did actually put out a very controversial ad about whether or not you give your vote to a smaller party or do you give it to the DA. It caused a lot of contestation. It caused a negative reaction. There were a number of commentaries and debates that were happening where the reaction to that ad, you know, said, you know, how could you do this? I mean, you essentially not necessarily living up to the spirit and the letter of what a democratic process is. Everybody has the right to choose who they want to vote for and why they want to vote for those political entities. This time around, when you look at that and you fast forward now with hindsight, I think the DA has realized that some of the dynamics around these issues that they went out in terms of trying to consolidate their footprint, but also not essentially allow for the smaller parties to become kingmakers in certain contexts. I think they realized that it wasn't that easy to go through. Khabe Mashaba's comments are quite interesting because I think, yes, again, it's about multi-party democracy. It's about the fact that you have to have a much more pluralistic approach to these things, to the way in which the governing and the governance of these councils go forward. But it also means that you've got to have some level of consensus as well in a multi-party democracy. And that consensus means that you've got to drive that relationship about what it is that you want to achieve in the governance and the running and the everyday running of the municipality. Because I was looking at your Twitter poll now, and in the three options that you've given the viewers to say why they feel that this is going the way it is. It can't be about what I feel is the way the budget should be, or how I feel what should be key. It's about basically the running of a municipality, and that I think is where a lot of the issues now going forward is how are they going to coalesce. It doesn't mean you have to support the DA, or it doesn't mean that the DA has to support the EFF, but they have got to coalesce around issues that are driven around the interests of the electorate in the municipality.
Yeah, it's all about actually living up to the word coalition, as you say. It cannot be about the kind of politicking that we are so used to in our country. In this instance, politicking with a view of the 2024 elections, for example.
Yeah, and I think this is an interesting benchmark. It's not an indicator of how 2024 may also unfold in terms of the coalition making. But more importantly, I think what surprised me was the very kind of rigidness that happened in the last 2 weeks with the press briefings and positions being unfolded and being presented as very inflexible at times. We will not work with the EFF. We will not work with the DA, etc., etc. But something was quite interesting, and I think there has been a realignment. Not necessarily where we thought the realignment would happen at the national, where the ANC and the DA may come together, but this realignment is actually not happening on the basis of saying we are going into a formal coalition. It's kind of a very interesting, loose realignment to say, EFF supporters, if you're looking at the number of seats, for example, you can actually work out that EFF supporters voted for the DA candidate who became mayor in the city of Johannesburg, including the Action SA. You can see that in Ekurhuleni. Of course, in Nelson Mandela Bay, it was quite a closely contested race, I think. I think the ANC won by a whisker there. But in Ethekwini as well, it's going to be important to watch what the IFP also does, because as much as they came in with their press briefing to say, oh, we're going into this, not as an agreement, but we will choose to support, and when we don't want to support, we won't support. So there's almost this kind of the right to disagree when we need to disagree. And I think that, again, becomes important because you don't know, even if you're taking a position stance at your executive level in the party, it's also interesting to see whether or not it filters down. So I think in this case, the DA was really, I think they are shocked that they got the support in both these big metros in Gauteng.
Sanusha Naidu, as always, thanks so much for weighing in on the important issues of the day. Political analyst Sanusha Naidu joining us there as we continue to try and understand the coalitions that have now resulted in particular areas in the country and what it might mean for service delivery in those parts of the country as well.